No, it's helpless there. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming out this evening. Obviously, we all care about our youth, and that is why we are here. My name is Mark Skellinger. I'm the principal at Radnor High School. What we're going to do tonight, I'm going to make a brief presentation. First of all, we're going to have everyone introduce themselves, and then we will take some questions and answers. Most of the panel will be seated up there. You'll be able to give a question. Mrs. Butler will repeat it, and we'll move from there, and hopefully we'll get into a dialogue here. Again, I'm Mark Skellinger, principal of the high school. Andy?
Good evening. My name's Andy Block. I'm a sergeant with the Radnor Police Department, and I'm currently in charge of the detective unit. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Robert Feinberg. I'm an emergency room physician assistant, and I'm the emergency manager for Mainline Health.
Good evening. My name is John Tootin. I'm the Radnor District Judge for the court that covers wards 1, 2, 3, and 6. And David Lang, who is the judge for the southern part of the township, follows the same procedure, so I will be answering for him too.
Hi everyone, my name's Nadine Carroll. I work for Caron Treatment Centers. I'm with the SAP department, so I do a lot of work in school districts in the Philadelphia region. I'm in the counties outside of Philadelphia. I'm at Radnor School District 2 days a week.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Haley Butler, and I am one of the assistant principals at the high school. Mr. Skellinger and I will be going back and forth for this first part of the presentation, and we're going to talk a little bit about Radnor High School specifically and some of the programs that we offer. And after us, Nadine Carroll will speak about her part at Radnor High School and what her role is for us. So before we start with the presentation directly, there are a few things I'd like to say and thank a whole bunch of people who helped this take place tonight and who have done some pretty great things for us over the past 2.5 years that I've been here at Radnor. First of all, the ASK, Alliance for Safe Kids, was formerly known as the Drug and Alcohol Task Force. And this year, the committee for ASK wanted to change the name to make it more inviting, to let you know that it's more than just drugs and alcohol, but it's really about the safety of our students, and it's really about the community building safety. And that was when REACH last year really got up and running again with the Radnor Encouraging Awareness, Communication, and Hope for Our Community, which is what REACH stands for. And both of these programs partner together to ASK comes from the high school level where they meet with us. It is also part of the middle school, and Esther Purnell is here tonight in the audience. And she runs the ASK at the middle school level and was also huge for me 2.5 years ago when we were working with the Drug and Alcohol Task Force. So I have to thank Esther personally. She gave me a lot of great advice going into this. And this evening, I have to thank Joy Antonopoulos, Kathy Link, Tricia Boyes, Margie Rosenberg, Mary Bale, Amy Fagenbaum, and Ellen Lear. First, to start off this year, have been a big help in the things that we have been doing at the building level. Christy Shug, Jennifer Superdoc, Elaine Schaefer, and Candace Wilson have been huge in bringing the community outreach program back to Radnor and reviving it over the past few years. And they've really, the two groups together and those group of women are spectacular. They have really brought amazing things to the high school and have taught me so much over the past 2 years that I can't thank them enough from the bottom of my heart. So, we'd also like to thank the Radnor Board of Health for providing us with this room and for giving us all the help, and to Jim, who is videotaping for us tonight and supplied all the great technical work that you see here this evening. So, you ready to get started?
Ready.
Okay. What we're going to talk about tonight a little bit is called the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, and it's called, I'll refer to it as the PAYS survey. This is a survey that's given every other year in the state of Pennsylvania. We decided to pilot it this year, and we actually paid for it because it wasn't given this year. It was an off year for the state, and we contacted them, and through our pupil services department, Andrea Shapego graciously volunteered to allow us to pilot it and paid for the test to be given. It is an internet-based test, and the results come back within 24 to 48 hours. And we piloted it in our 10th grade health classrooms. One, it's a wide range of demographics. Even though they're the same age group, what you have in there are students from all walks of life. You've got the top of the class, you have students that academically may have some struggles, and you've got everybody in between in our health classes. They're all mixed in. So it's a good sampling of Radnor High School. One of the first things that it looks for, it does look a lot at alcohol and drug use. And one of the things that we looked for in the survey, just to see what kind of results we would get back, is the trends. So we looked for trends specifically for this evening. We pulled the information on alcohol use, prescription medication, and the use of marijuana currently in this small pilot that we took of the students. 170 tests were used, 136 were valid. The Pennsylvania, this is an extensive survey. There's about 200 questions on it. And what they do is they have some, I don't know, I call them the liar questions, and they try to figure out if the students are telling the truth or not. So out of the 170, a couple of those were teachers going in just practicing with the survey for us, but it also threw out about 30 where the kids had indicated that they weren't necessarily telling the truth or they were just answering in a random pattern. So 136 surveys were actually valid and used for the results that we have.
We were presented with this opportunity a couple of years ago, and frankly, I said no. Because I had seen it portrayed in the press down at TE, and it's, you know, we're trying to help kids, and it's put on the headline that so many percentage of this, so many percentage of that, and we did not have a group like this. Frankly, I'm pretty protective of the high school. So, you know, I was very wary of those kind of statistics just going out there on the front page of a paper, not being interpreted properly and sensationalized. I think we're a lot further along. Haley deserves a ton of credit for bringing this task force back together, making it vital, all the people she mentioned. I think the fact that we have a community gathering now, we're able to take that leap, to make that step, to have a discussion about this without throwing accusations. This is happening everywhere. We're trying to be realistic about it. We're trying to address it in a non-punitive manner. And I think now we were ready to do this, and we'll find out whether we were or not.
I like to look at the positive of what's happening at Radnor High School. And if you look at the slide, it says 50% have reported that they're not drinking at all at the 10th grade level. But what the trend did show us was the use is escalating between 9th and 10th grade, because it did ask an age question, and that's not on here, but the age is what was the first time that you used. And the first time became between the age of the 14 to 16 age range, or right about 15 is the primary time where students indicated they first used. So 25% indicated that they are drinking less than twice in a 30-day, that should say 30-day period, I'm sorry, which was about 35 students had answered that yes, that was the case, that about twice a month they would drink. Now, it didn't indicate how much, it didn't indicate binge drinking, but that they did in fact have a drink of alcohol. And 20%, 27 students indicated that they were drinking more than twice a month. When it got to the question of the marijuana use, 71% indicated that they were not smoking or had never tried smoking marijuana. 11%, 14 students indicated that they were smoking marijuana less than twice a month. And 18% indicated, that's 24 students, that they were smoking marijuana more than twice a month. Prescription drug use. What we have found with the trend of prescription drug use that isn't indicated in the survey, and I think Mark will vouch for this, is that prescription drug use is something that we see more in the upperclassmen than we do in the younger grades. In the younger grades, the experimentation starts with the alcohol and the marijuana, and then it will lead to the use of recreational prescription drugs. So 91.8 report that they have never have inappropriately used over-the-counter medication, prescription drugs. 4.2%, or 5 students, have reported using recreationally Ritalin, Adderall, Xanax, or Valium. And 4% report using those drugs 20 or more times within a 30-day period. This is not information that surprised us at the high school level. This was not something that was not consistent with what we see in what we call HS HOPE, which is an extension of MS HOPE, which is our student assistance program. And what that consists of, it consists of a team of guidance counselors, Dorothy Lowry, who's our assistant student assistance program coordinator and our drug and alcohol specialist on staff, and Sandy Schoenholtz, who is our academic liaison, and also Sue McFarland, who is in the back, our school nurse, who is vital to that team. And HS Hope is a confidential process that we use at the high school. So if a student appears or seems to be having a change in personality, a change in friends, a sudden dramatic change in their grade, a change in appearance, where they were a student who kept themselves very well put together, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they suddenly look a little bit more sloppy or not quite as quote-unquote clean. They look a little bit more lethargic or tired. Anything like that that a staff member notices, that a parent may be concerned about, a guidance counselor sees, or we see as administrators, we take that and refer that student to what's called HS Hope. From that process, we then contact the parent to say, these are signs or things that we have noticed about your child, and we make the connection with the parent community. Have you seen these things at home? Are you seeing anything that might indicate that there's something, whether it's an academic struggle, is the student being bullied? Is there drug and alcohol concerns? Do you have a concern as well? And if you say, yes, I've noticed these things, we'll put you into a process that is completely confidential, where we'll take the students' grades, we'll look at their behaviors, and we'll give you a full picture of what we're seeing in the building. And then we'll put you in touch with Dorothy Lowry or Sandy Schoenholtz, depending on if it's academic or a concern of a social emotional kind. And then there's a whole bunch of steps that happen from there on, whether it's meeting with Dorothy and doing a drug and alcohol assessment, or meeting with Sandy and doing some academic testing. Sometimes we go to outside resources. You know, things happen in students' lives that affect them in so many different ways. Everything from a sibling going to college, sometimes disappointments as simple as, for the first time, they're not receiving straight A's and they don't understand why, so they're struggling just with coming to the high school. Maybe their best friend moved away. Maybe their parents are going through a divorce. Or maybe they weren't able to fit in, so what they thought would make them cool was drinking on a Saturday night or smoking pot for that first time, and it was something that became a way of escaping from however they were feeling. So those are some of the things that your adolescents run into, and that sometimes we'll see sooner because we see them for 8 hours in a day. And then if they're there for activities such as athletics or drama or music or one of the many clubs that we offer, they could be with us for 10 to 12 hours in a clip. So there might be things that we'll see that you might not. And that doesn't mean that you're not doing your job as a parent. It just means that your kids are really involved and busy, and they're going to do their best to present to you that they are the same child that you had when they were in first grade, that they were 13, that they were when they were 14. But there might be things that get in their way, and our job is really to make sure that we can put all those pieces together to help support you and your student.
I think it's really important to note that these aren't kids that do this aren't bad kids. They're not bad people. They don't feel well. They're trying to feel better. Adolescence is a very difficult time. When you think about it, and we talk about this all the time, we have 1,200 9th through 12th graders pulsing through that building every day. It's amazing it goes as well as it does. You think about all the things that they come in with. And it used to be that the subcultures of adolescence were confined to a school building. That is no longer the case. With social networking, with all the communication technology, these subcultures exist far outside of the confines of the building. With that in mind, we're going to talk about this later on. We have a presentation coming May 19th in the evening to the high school, and then May 20th to the students, a cyberbullying presentation underwritten by Verizon, which is very nice of them, was written about in today's Delaware County Times. They did it over at Haverford High School today, and we've been in discussions with them. We just finalized the date today, actually. But this is what we're talking about, that all of these influences, we do see a lot, and we see some things with your children that you probably don't see at home, and vice versa. But it's scary because the influences are coming from far and wide, and not just the kids sitting next to them in English class.
And the way we used this survey, since it was a pilot, some of the things that it helped us do this year was decide on the programming for our speakers. We've brought in a series of speakers over the past 2.5 years to address different issues that we're seeing at the high school. It also helps us stay aware of the trends, maybe something we didn't think about or something we weren't aware of. And it really gave us a good idea of where, for the most part, what are the trends in the high school. Now, what was interesting is there's a lot of aspects to this survey, and I can drill down. It is anonymous, but I'm able to drill down on the demographics and drill down on the patterns that we're seeing with the 37 students or the 24 students. And as I was doing this, what I found is that it's identical, the same 18 to 21%. The same 14 to 28 students are coming up in the same categories of the alcohol, the marijuana, and the prescription. Which is not, again, anything new to us that wasn't surprising, but it is the same group of students that we see over and over again that sometimes starts as early as 9th grade or sometimes doesn't appear until 11th, but it is the same patterns that are coming up. And this is also consistent with our HS Hope referrals. And what I will tell you is this year we've had over 110 students referred to HS Hope, either by their families, by their teachers, or by their counselors. So what is happening is that people are out there reaching out for help and asking for help. And only 7, I believe, Sue, if I'm not mistaken, 7 families have actually said, no, we're good, we've got it covered and taken in hand. So we've had over 90 families say, yes, please, what are the programs out there, and how can you help us, and what can you, what access do we have to programs? With that said, I'm going to introduce, do you have anything else to say? With that said, I'm going to introduce Nadine Carroll, who does work with our HS Hope program. And she's going to talk a little bit about her role as a drug and alcohol specialist for us through the Caron Foundation. Nadine?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Please let me know if you have any trouble hearing me. Is this okay? All right, good. I'm not super comfortable with microphones. Again, I'm Nadine Carroll. I mentioned I work for Caron Treatment Centers as a drug and alcohol rehab facility. It's located in Warnersville, which is close to Reading, so it's about an hour from here. The job and the work that I do is within the SAP department, student assistance. So I work in the Philadelphia region. I really travel around to different schools, and I work with students. Some of the work I do is prevention work. So a lot of that's in middle school, some in high school. That's maybe doing some classroom presentations. I also do then some intervention work. I'll do some small support group work. I'll work with some students one-on-one. And in the Radnor district, this is the 3rd year that I've been here, and I've been able to work at both the middle school and the high school. Most of the work I do are small support groups. I do some work individually with students as well. It's been very interesting for me to be able to first work at the middle school and then follow certain students up throughout the high school. That's been the continuity of that has been really nice. I do a lot of different support groups, but drug and alcohol related. The drug and alcohol groups kind of come down to, a couple different categories. We have a drug and alcohol insight, and that's usually for younger students who we kind of identify as more at risk, or maybe who have been identified as are experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And a lot of this is drug and alcohol education, making sure they have the right kind of information, making sure they know what the negative consequences of their use could be, how it could relate to their own lives, what they could have to lose by using drugs and alcohol. Then the other group, drug and alcohol intervention group, and we kind of call the group life skills, but this is more for students who really have been identified as abusing drugs and alcohol. And this, I'm able to kind of work with them either, again, in smaller groups or maybe some one-on-one here. And again, it's looking at the decisions that they're making, how their lives have been affected, what's changed for them, and kind of what maybe is at the root of their drug and alcohol use. And it's, again, going over information and education and really making sure they're aware of what they're doing, what, the consequences on their body, on their health, on their emotions, and what that could be. Some of the work I also do if students have gone to a treatment center and they're transitioning back to the high school, I can work and support the students as they come back into the high school and as they work on a recovery program and being sober. So the work that I've done, I think really it's, from what I've seen, is very consistent with what Haley just mentioned from that survey. I think from what I've seen with alcohol, marijuana, and prescription drugs, that's very consistent from what I see and what I hear working with students. So that kind of in a nutshell is what I'm doing and what I'm doing at Radnor. For the next maybe 5-10 minutes, I want to talk with you a little. You can have a PowerPoint here, a little bit about different warning signs and symptoms, things to kind of look out for identifying drug or alcohol use. These are some things that I'm sure things that I've seen in my work. I think things that teachers see, things that parents see. A lot of this, to just start by saying the warning signs aren't always clear-cut, and this is absolutely true. I think as we go through a few of these slides, you'll see that a lot of the things, physical changes, behavioral changes that I'll mention are very typical of teenagers and adolescents. And that's why this age group, it can be so hard to identify someone who may be experimenting or using drugs and alcohol, because some of the changes that we see, you may say, well, that's typical of adolescents. So it can be really hard to identify. But there are certain things to really be aware of. And these are a few red flags that absolutely, if you notice any of this, it's good to take action. Any smell of alcohol in the breath, a sudden obsession with breath mints. It's, covering up, kids are sneaky and they're gonna try to cover up any kind of use. So popping a breath mint, cover that, the smoke on their breath, smelling of alcohol, whatever, extra cologne. They may try to cover it up, but if you notice, any kind of smell, they may say, it wasn't me, I was around this, I was in this house, I was at this party. No, though, even if, a student hasn't used the drugs or alcohol themselves, that, the aroma, the smell does indicate that they were somewhere where drugs and alcohol were present. So that should be a red flag, an indicator anyway. Early cigarette use, absolutely. That's, linked to higher instances of experimentation and use with other drugs and alcohol. And then, of course, evidence of drugs, sorry, that got cut off, or drug paraphernalia in their rooms or personal spaces. And you think, okay, these things are obvious, but it's amazing how many times, these things will come up and, a parent, even a teacher may, I don't want to say ignore it, but it kind of goes, unattended. That it's like, okay, well, that can be explained away. Maybe that's something else. That's something a friend left. And kids can make excuses for these things, but I think it's very, very important to notice any of those things in particular, very important to take action. And I'll talk, in a few minutes about the types of things that, at least some good first steps that you can take. In addition to this, I'll just go very quickly through physical changes. And again, a lot of these, as I kind of read through the list, I'm like, a lot of teenagers, they're like this anyway. Their energy, high energy, low energy, the changes in sleep and appetite. I mean, you see this in teenagers. Doesn't mean they have a drug and alcohol problem or they're using drugs and alcohol. This could be a number of different reasons. But I do think it's very important to be aware that any of these changes that you notice could potentially be a symptom of drug and alcohol use. So I think the main thing to say with the physical changes, and then I'll get to some behavioral and attitude changes, is that it's really important to kind of be aware of any changes that you may notice and really try to think, okay, what's the cause of this, and have conversations about it. Changes in speech pattern, dilated pupils, consistently red eyes, that's another very big one. So these things are important not to ignore, but really to notice. The behavior and attitude, I think a lot of these are really important. You can spend a minute looking at the list, but the one that I see, an abrupt change in friends, I've noticed this with students, especially if I've started working with them. I'm thinking about Radnor in the middle school, and if I continued up into the high school, they'll talk about, I'll see them with a new group of friends or hanging out with new kids, or they'll talk about having new friends. And it's amazing the link then, as I see eventually there's experimentation with drugs and alcohol. And this isn't always the case, and I know that kids change friends. I know that does happen, but I would say often if you see this abrupt change in friend groups, that could be a red flag, to ask about it, see who these friends are, see, why the change, particularly if they're an identified drinking and drug crowd. That, of course, is another red flag. I think also decreasing grades with interest in school activities that were once previously enjoyed. That's another big one, too, I think, with some teenage boys I work with. Often I hear that they say, I used to play a sport. I used to be on a team. I used to really like this, but I don't do that anymore. They're now using drugs and alcohol. And what tends to happen, especially with, early experimentation, when you get into use, misuse, and then abuse, is that you really start to drop the activities that were once important because now the drug use is the focus. Now, after school, instead of thinking, I'm going to get it together, I have practice today, I'm going to play the sport. Instead, it's about, I'm going to hang out with my friends. I'm going to use drugs, or I'm going to smoke marijuana. This really does become the focus, so it's hard to keep up that sports schedule or whatever it is they were involved in. So I really think the kind of decrease in grades, but also the school activities is a really big one. And you kind of read the others, again, loss of motivation, increased need for money, secretiveness. They don't all mean, yes, it's drug and alcohol use. Your teenager is probably going to be secretive and not sharing stuff anyway. It's probably true. But again, just, be aware of things that seem a little suspicious. And then we say if you suspect use, I think one of the most important things that I like to say is take action. And in this case, for parents, ask your child if they're using drugs. I think sometimes from what I hear from students, their parents aren't having those conversations with them. The student certainly isn't having the conversation with their parents, but I hear some students say, my parents are clueless. Now, whether this is the case or not, I'm just working with the students, so this is what I hear from them, and I don't think that's always the case. I think sometimes parents do know a lot more about what's going on than the student or the child gives them credit for. I do think, though, it's important for the parents to have that conversation and up front ask your kids, are you using drugs? Sometimes, or are you drinking? Have you experimented? Have you tried this? Not all kids are going to be honest about it. Some will flat out deny it, say no, no, no. But sometimes I think people would be surprised how many kids say or would be honest and willing to admit that they are using. What I found with working with students, it still surprises me sometimes, but I hear them telling me that, I'm drinking or I'm smoking and I don't really want to be. Or I know maybe I want to be, but I also know it's a problem, or I know it's not good for me. So they're not, some kids may be very pro-drug use and I don't care, I don't have a problem, I'm not changing, but the vast majority that I work with recognize that their behaviors are unhealthy and that this isn't something they don't want to continue down the road and have it snowball and get a lot worse. They don't intend to use drugs or smoke or be a heavy drinker for their entire lives. They really do recognize that there are some negative consequences that are already happening to them. And in a lot of cases, they want a little help and they want to change. So sometimes just asking, hey, are you drinking? When you go out with your friends, when you're hanging out, if you're at parties, have you been drinking? Are you smoking marijuana? Have you tried it? You may be surprised that your child may be upfront in their response to you. If they're not, then you do have the authority to investigate other methods. You can search their room. I know the privacy is a big issue for kids, and I know that, I know that can be tough, but as a parent, you could, search their room. You could buy a drug test and have them drug tested. So these are options that you can take if you suspect use and do think that there is an issue. Instead of, asking your kid, are you using drugs? And they say no, and say, okay, you told me no. Really the fear is if you're still worried, you don't want to let it go because it really is so important to take action early. And sometimes I even say, most kids, I would say, have Facebook. And I know probably, if you have Facebook too, they don't let you be their friend or they won't let you see what's on Facebook, but you could have it be a rule and say, if you have Facebook, I have to know your password. So I get to check to see what the content is and what's on there because a lot happens on Facebook. And even the cell phone, I don't know how you feel about that, but to just check their text messages, check the content of their phone. So this is really also showing them that you're involved in their lives. You're very interested in what they're doing and you're keeping an eye on them. You're concerned about what they're doing and that you're going to prove that, you're a part, you're going to check in and follow up on what they're doing. If kids get too much freedom, it's very, very easy for them to run away with it. Just a couple more slides. I won't spend too much longer talking, but we kind of go over, recommended rules. One thing, no use rules for children everywhere. And that's being, again, to clearly kind of establish boundaries. Again, going to kind of say you give kids a little freedom, or you start to make exceptions, and then they'll take advantage of that. So by clearly stating, I expect you not to use drugs or alcohol, I think it is very important to have that kind of conversation and tell them that and have them hear it from you. And then have consequences if they do break that rule. And you could even consider having them sign a no-use contract with you. So actually physically having a piece of paper that outlines what it is and having them sign it. And that can really be huge for kids. In addition to that, I think, when kids are hanging out, parties, sleepovers, these are key times when kids really will get into trouble and act up and will use different substances. So it's, check in. If, they're going to be at a party, call up the parents at that house and talk with them and see, what the deal is going to be there, what it's going to be like. Check in throughout the night, call and just say, hey, can I talk to my kid, and have them come over and actually talk with you, make up an excuse about a cell phone, call the house and have the kid come over and talk. Just kind of check in and be aware. Setting a curfew, being awake when they get home, I think that can be a really important one too, to kind of see what they're like when they come through the door, check in on them. I'd say in addition to this, really just, talk with your kids. As the opportunities come up, to talk about drugs and alcohol, I think it's a topic it's really important not to shy away from it. And again, from working with kids, I hear this a lot, that they kind of wish they could have these conversations with their parents. A lot of kids that I work with don't talk about any kind of drug or alcohol use with their parents, or at least how they're feeling. Their parents may be, very well informed about what's going on, but the kid still is, I kind of say, what you just told me, about how you're feeling, how you had a hard day today, how you were tempted to use, can you tell that to your parent? And they're like, it's hard. So I would say, really recommend, starting that conversation with yourself, checking in with your kids, asking, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, use different opportunities, in the media, with television shows they watch, as things come up, the music they listen to, with all the drug and alcohol references, use those as an intro point to sit down, have a talk with your kids about drugs and alcohol. I think if there's anything else you want me to add, kind of going on, that's kind of what I have prepared to talk with you about. I mean, there's so much, this topic is so big that, there's really a lot that I could have stood up here to talk with you about. If you think of any questions that you have, I know at the end we're doing, the question and answer, so please feel free to ask anything. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was excellent. And ladies and gentlemen, up here, we will have the PowerPoints available for you. We will have them posted, so I know Nadine has some links up there for you to take a look at. Next, we have Sergeant Andy Block from the Radnor Township Police Department, who will be speaking. Also, I know that you were given note cards and pens. As questions come up, if you want to, feel free to write them down so you can ask them at the end and you won't forget, or if the question gets answered as you go. But that was more for you to be able to take notes on.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Butler. Good evening, everyone. As I stated earlier, it is a pleasure to be here this evening, and when I get the PowerPoint presentation up, what I'm going to discuss this evening is I'm going to go over some statistics in Radnor Township for 2010 and 2011, and then also discuss some trends that we see in the region with respect to drug and alcohol use, and then we're going to talk a little bit about recent developments with the K2 and the spice, the synthetic marijuanas that are out on the market right now, and what's happening with that. For 2010 and 2011, year to date, I want to start speaking about our alcohol offenses that we see in Radnor Township. From January 1st of 2011 through today, there have been 74 citations issued for underage drinking. So the affected group here, the youngest person that's been cited this year has been 13 years of age up till 20 years of age. For the same period a year ago, from January 1st, 2010 until April 5th, 2010, there were 51 citations issued. So we've seen, obviously, an increase here. Two incidents are related to that. One back on New Year's, and also another significant college party that we just recently investigated. So that's why we saw the spike in the increase in the citations. The total citations that were issued for underage drinking in the year 2010 were 215. And those citations, once they're issued, they go before our district justices, Judge Tootin and Judge Lang, for disposition. And Judge Tootin will be up shortly to discuss the process and what happens once a citation is issued. We want to talk about the current trends with respect to the drugs and narcotic violations that we're seeing in the township. And overall, it's low, but it's also a concern. It's always a concern when we're starting to deal with illicit drugs and narcotics, and that's why the awareness is extremely important, as well as the education on what to look for, and that's what this evening's about. It's bringing in several different people to talk to you, the parents, about what to look for and the trends. So far for this year, we've had 11 offenses to date. 8 of those offenses were possession of THC, and I apologize to you, we were using the legal term on it. That's possession of marijuana. There was 1 offense for possession of heroin this year and 2 offenses for possession of drug paraphernalia, as well as prescription medications. Now, to break down some ages for you on this, on the first one for the possession of marijuana, the youngest person that's been arrested this year in Radnor Township was 14. The oldest person was 46 on the marijuana violations, just in 2011. For the heroin possession, it was 1 person so far. They were aged 27 years. The 2 offenses that we see for the possession of drug paraphernalia was split. One was for the actual paraphernalia, and one was for prescription drugs, where they were not licensed to have those drugs. When we move over to 2010 to do a comparison and analysis for that, there were 10 arrests for marijuana. The youngest age in 2010 was age 12. A young man had marijuana on his person at age 12. And the highest age on that was 56. There were 2 offenses for the possession of heroin, and the 2 ages on that range from 22 to 38. And we usually see that when we're dealing with the heroin or the real heavy narcotics, where it's a very small age group in the 20s and the 30s. We don't usually see it outside of that. There's a number of different reasons why, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we speak about the medical aspect of it. And there were also 3 arrests for possession of drug paraphernalia in 2010. Also, with respect to the narcotics and the drug-related offenses, overall, the 44 arrests went for the possession of marijuana. And that, again, that age went from 12 to 54. There was a possession of heroin. There were 5 arrests in 2010, and that went from age 18 to 32. Again, we're seeing that small window as far as the ages are concerned with the heroin itself. And there were actually 3, that's a typo in there, 3 offenses for possession of drug paraphernalia and or prescription narcotics. The ages for that were 18 to 22 years of age. So with having these arrests within the township, like I said, they're relatively low, but 1 offense or 1 arrest, in our opinion, is too much, because obviously the prevention, the education is where we want to be. And we want to try to have some realistic goals with this as well. We talk about the current narcotics market and the trends in the Philadelphia region. When we're dealing with the prescription narcotics that are out on the market, the Percocets right now, and this is just recently as of Monday from the Attorney General's office, we receive those bulletins weekly. The current market rate on the street for the Percocets, 10 milligram tablets, is $5 per tablet. When you get into the Xanax, it's $2 per 5 milligram tablets. And then the problem that we see is with the OxyContin, and this varies depending on the supply and demand on what one may be able to get off the street. So right now, currently, it's 50 cents per milligram. The average OxyContin tablet is 80 milligrams, so it's about $40 a tablet. It's very expensive because there's a supply and demand. So these are the prices that we're seeing in the area, and our concern and what the trends tend to be are that a person, it used to be referred to, I'll back up a little bit, with marijuana was considered the gateway drug. We don't look at it that way in law enforcement anymore as marijuana. We look at alcohol because we see the trend that it's starting in younger ages. All right, so that's your gateway drug. That's opening the door. Once they get into the marijuana, it leads to other things. What tends to happen in this region is that the prescription medications are available, all right, to the adolescents, to the teens, and to people in their early 20s if they don't have the prescription. So if it's at home, it's not secured, they can get into those prescriptions if they're not used all the time. It becomes cost prohibitive, though, for them when they start using it. So they revert to a couple different things. One is we see sometimes they'll revert to property crimes, where they'll commit thefts and burglaries to break in the residences, all right, to take items out that are small to convert them on the market to cash so that they can go and they can purchase these items on the market, on the black market, if you will, the drug market. So that's one of the concerns that we have. But the Oxycontin is one of the most potent narcotic that's out there right now, but as you can see, it's very cost prohibitive. So what's the alternative to the Oxycontin is the heroin, and that's what we want to talk about next. Unfortunately, Philadelphia is one of the heroin hubs on the East Coast, Philadelphia and Baltimore. So what happens right now, the current market value for one bag of heroin, a dime bag of heroin, is $10. They do bundle them, okay? Bundles run between $80 and $100, and there's usually 10 to 13 bags in a bundle. So this is how the market works. As we stated, Philadelphia is one of the heroin hubs, and what happens is they are basically dealing in stamps or names, the different drug dealers down in Philadelphia, the heroin dealers. So they have different names that are out there on the street, and these are just some examples that were recently picked up by the Attorney General's office and the narcotics enforcement agents. So we have Paco, Great Dane, Chiclets. These are different names that they make up and they stamp the packets with. So it's a market, it's a supply and demand, and when somebody says the best out there this week is Great Dane, that's where you're going to see the focus of the people going into the city, buying it, and coming back out to the suburbs. So it happens. In this area, 15 minutes down, 15 minutes back, they're back home. The trend, though, once the heroin comes back out here, it's not injected. All right? To traditional forms, it's usually an IV-abused drug. We're finding that it's being snorted. Sometimes it goes undetected simply because the way the purity levels are, they get their high and they move along. But if you read in the Inquirer, it was about 30 days ago, there was a very high purity concentration that went out. It started in Philadelphia, it worked its way into Camden, and then it got into Gloucester County. Gloucester County is very similar to Delaware County, the way the demographics are. They have Gloucester City, and then they have the suburban areas around that. And within a 7-day period, there were 6 deaths as a result of the bad heroin that was out there, or the purity level of it. So this is the danger that one can experience once they get out there. We're fortunate we don't see a lot in this area, but it's out here. When I say we don't see a lot, we don't see it on the medical front, and you'll hear about that in a few minutes. So these are the trends that we see in law enforcement in the region, and we want everybody to be aware of what's going on. I have a picture up here of Amy Winehouse. For those that you don't know who Amy Winehouse is, she's from London. She's British, and she is a singer-songwriter over there. She has several records on the market, records or albums. On the left, this was before she started getting involved with heroin. On the right, this was the picture of her taken about a year ago after she got involved with heroin. It's a severe heroin addiction. She's been in and out of rehab. She's written songs about rehab, so she does not want to go into rehab and what occurs. But this is the picture. This is the true picture of what happens. You have a beautiful young lady on the left, and on the right, this is the byproduct of getting hooked on the heroin and other illicit drugs. I do want to update everybody in the room about the K2 and Spice. K2 and Spice is a synthetic marijuana that recently showed up on the market within the last 12 months. And basically, the DEA, all right, the Federal Drug Administration, has been able to place it on the Controlled Substance Act, which is a tremendous benefit for law enforcement, but we're not where we need to be with it. What this does is federally it prohibits it to be sold, it prohibits one to possess, and it prohibits one to use the K2 or the Spice. There are 5 synthetic types that are placed on this list right now, and it's also known and traded on the market as a black magic smoke. It's usually in a packet, and it's usually sold in a lot of the different gas stations. We saw a fair amount of them up and down the 202 corridors where they were selling them. It's very dangerous, and you'll find out in a few minutes why with respect to the medical intervention if somebody uses this. But we made some inroads with it on the federal level. So we're awaiting legislation in Pennsylvania to make it illegal to possess or use. But currently, with the DEA putting it on the Controlled Substance Act list, you can't possess it. Right now in Pennsylvania, if you have it, we can take it from you as a law enforcement agency. We just can't charge you because it's federal law, and your local or your state police officers can only enforce the state laws. That's why we continue to lobby our legislators, our senators, and our state reps to get the K2 and the spice on the State Drug Act so that we can go a little bit further with the enforcement. But this just came down on the 3rd of March, so it's good progress. We're moving to where we need to be. The dangers with the K2 and the spices, nobody knows what the cosmetic makeup is of the actual packet itself. So when people start ingesting it, if they overdose, they go into a medical facility. The medical facility doesn't know how to treat it because they don't know what that synthetic or that cosmetic makeup was of it. But there is some good news, and we're moving in the right direction with that. But you need to contact your state reps and your state senators to keep lobbying them to get this put on the state drug prohibit the act itself. I was asked to talk a little bit about REACH and ASK and the benefits, and there's a tremendous amount of benefits for both of these organizations. I was very, very fortunate that I was asked just about a year ago to come to the first REACH meeting and speak to everybody, and I'm very happy to see tonight that it's growing. It's growing in leaps and bounds, and this is extremely important, simply because there are forums that are set up through these organizations to talk about alcohol-related issues in an environment where I think that the communication is extremely important, because people will come in, all right, and share their experiences with other people in the room. It also deals with the drug-related issues. We're dealing with sex-related issues. You heard earlier about the texting. Well, it's no longer texting that we're seeing problems with. It's actually getting into the sexting. Good Morning America 2 weeks ago had an unbelievable program on what's going on a daily basis that's out there in our social networking. So this opens up a forum to share experiences and communication with everybody in the community, because at the end of the day, we are investing in our future for the community, and our future is our children, our adolescents, the ones that are in grade school, the ones that are in middle school, high school, and then going into college. They're our future. So with respect to REACH and ASK, I would ask everybody in here that's here tonight, it's tremendous, and when you leave for the next time we have one of the forums, you need to bring somebody. We want to make this grow exponentially, all right, and make it all part of the community. So I thank you very much for having me this evening, and I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you, Sergeant Block. Now we have Robert Feinberg, who is going to talk to you about what is seen at the ER and what the physician's assistants and the doctors are seeing from the cause and effect of these drugs in our adolescents, and what are some of the signs to look for there as well. Do you have a PowerPoint?
I do.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Just try to find it here.
Okay.
All right. There we go. Okay. Good evening. First off, I want to thank everybody for inviting me this evening to talk to you about this subject. What I did was, I actually wanted to give you some real-time data. I work in the emergency room at Bryn Mawr Hospital, one of your local hospitals, and so I had asked someone to do me a favor and pull all the statistics. So we looked at alcohol specifically for individuals between the ages of 13 and 21 and what we were seeing. We had alcohol-related visits of 482 in the last 12 months. 267 of those alcohol visits, more than half, were between 13 and 21 years old. 27 of those patients were admitted. They were sick enough that they actually got admitted to the hospital. Sadly, over the last 12 months, we had 2 deaths. And in my mind, that's far too many. 1 is too many, 2 too many. So what I was asked to do tonight was kind of give you the science, but my feeling is that everyone in this room could go on the internet and look in Google and get all the data that you wanted to get on alcohol, on marijuana, on amphetamines. So what I'm going to do is kind of go over the general things that we see as far as the different categories, from central nervous system, how it affects the cardiac system, how it affects the GI system, so on and so forth. But as I do that, instead of just giving you scientific data, I'm going to tell you what that actually means that we see when patients present in the emergency department. So for example, here's the central nervous system. We talk about depression, euphoria, Disinhibition, sedation, and Wernicke's-Korsakoff syndrome is a long-term disease we see in alcoholics over many, many years. But what this really means when we talk about depression, we get kids that come in from the community, from the colleges, they're just beside themselves. We talk about euphoria, of course, the typical high, and disinhibition is what really concerns me about our young people. They have no idea what they've done the next day, where they've been, what has happened to them. Everything from they have no idea how they got the laceration on their forehead to they have no idea what the sexual experience they had the night before. And this is very concerning. As far as cardiac disease goes, we see increase in heart rate, decrease in blood pressure, and arrhythmias and ventricular arrhythmias, which is, for those that are not medical, that's the part of the heart that actually causes and creates true blood pressure in the body. We have seen awful things, from simple respiratory depression, where we have to keep waking people up or they stop breathing. In the last, 3 or 4 months, I've had a case where my patient the respiratory rate was so low, we were very close to putting a tube in called intubation so that we could breathe for them. Cardiac-wise, I had a patient that unless you kept waking her up, her heart rate would go down into the 20s, which obviously is very dangerous. So we see all kinds of things, to the point where we had, and I think it's important to mention this, I had a 19-year-old female patient who came in cardiac arrest. After 2 hours of an entire team, almost the entire emergency room, working on this young lady, we were able to bring her back. But she had a cardiac arrest from alcohol. Her alcohol level, and officer, 0.8, is that what it is? 0.8. Her alcohol level was 3 times that. It was over 300 when we actually tested her blood. Respiratory, we talked about. Those are fancy words for low heart rate. Apnea means not slow breathing. Apnea means not breathing at all. And aspiration from vomiting, inhaling the vomitus into the lungs, getting septic or very sick with fevers and spending weeks and weeks in the hospital and even having permanent lung damage. These are typical. Vomiting, if someone's chronically drinking, bleeding, ulcers, hepatitis from alcoholic hepatitis, and pancreatitis. These are all symptoms, these are all long-term effects of drinking. Some other kinds of symptoms that we see, we'll get patients that are semi-conscious that come in with very high temperatures or low temperatures. With a high temperature, medical personnel typically think of a sepsis or an infection, when indeed it can truly be from alcohol. Magnesium is an electrolyte and it can be decreased. So let me just kind of go back for 1 second about alcohol. And I know there are folks in the room who have talked about rehab and helping children. I'm the skeptic in the room. I've been an emergency room physician assistant in the city environment, downtown Philadelphia, and out here in the suburbs. And I will tell you, for adults, I have never seen anyone request for the first time to go to rehab. So I am so happy that you're here, because I think this is the time to stop it. This is the time to find it. This is the time to help our children, so they're not the 30 or 40-year-old that is asking me for the 5th, 6th, 10th time to go to rehab. Marijuana, I was asked to talk a little bit about marijuana. A lot of these signs and symptoms are pretty much the same, and I think that if you're going to look at something, I would go with this young lady here's symptoms to find out, if you're looking to see what signs and symptoms that might occur at home that might give you suspicion that someone's using marijuana or alcohol. These are more of the things that over time and also that I'm going to see in the emergency department. Impaired motor coordination, just like you see with alcohol, the euphoria. The things that we see with marijuana, the other thing that I don't know if the police officer can comment on maybe a little bit later is, are we seeing pure marijuana or are we seeing things that are mixed with marijuana? Yeah, most of the time we see it mixed, and I know that when I was down in Maryland, we were seeing it with some substances that were causing extreme paranoia. and patients will come into the emergency room. And again, we typically kind of use a pattern of how we analyze folks. And if you come in that you're paranoid, we're absolutely going to do testing. We're going to do drug testing, because it may not be a behavioral issue. It may be a drug issue. Impaired judgment, we've already talked about that with alcohol. We talk about this with all drugs of any type. The impaired judgment, I think, for our children is huge, in that anything from driving. We've had people that simply say, "Oh, well, I wasn't driving, I was walking home," and they walked along the top edge of the hill or the curb and fell down 2 stories. Okay. Some typical things that we see kind of 2 hours afterwards is a conjunctival injection. That's kind of the eyes. Increase in appetite. We've all heard about that. Dry mouth and tachycardia. And these are things that very often come into the emergency room for behavioral issues that are signs of withdrawal and that we do not have history. Remembering that some of these things that are in our system, I cannot always, if I do a drug test, I'm not going to see it today, depending on what it is. If it's 24 hours after drinking and having a drinking binge, it's not going to necessarily be in the system. If it's marijuana, it's going to be several days. Other drugs will be several days, but I may not see it in the system. So instead of reading down the list, I'm going to keep going here for you. Synthetic marijuana I was asked to talk about. Here are some of the scientific names that are out of the synthetic marijuana. The biggest thing that I think you should know about synthetic marijuana, I even checked today again to make sure that I was not incorrect. I even contacted our lab. I can't test for it, so I have no idea what it is. If you come in with all these symptoms, I have no idea what that drug is that's in your system to help counteract that medication or that drug. Officer talked about spice. These are just some images of different packages that I had found on the internet for you. Some of the things that folks are seeing, and again, I can't tell you whether it's synthetic marijuana, whether it's behavior, or whether it's post-drug use by several days, and we're seeing withdrawal and paranoia symptoms because I can't test for it. But some of the recorded documentation on what kinds of things are being seen that are significant with the synthetic marijuana is panic attacks. If all of a sudden, it's one of those things to look out for. If all of a sudden your children have never had problems before and they're suddenly having what appears to be panic attacks, over agitation, anxiety, complaining of numbness, and we've even seen seizures from this. Amphetamines, again, the same thing, and I don't want to belate on the medical information here because I think you can all look that up. But the same kind of thing that I can look for. But we see death from amphetamines. We see overdoses all the time. And I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly. So how does the typical patient present? They come in by ambulance. Very often in this area, one of the things the ambulance squads like to do for the alcohol is put a nice red bag over their head so that the patient doesn't vomit all over the ambulance. Sometimes they're unconscious. Sometimes they're just belligerent and out of control. And what does that mean that's going to happen in the emergency department? If the patient if I can tell how old they are, if I can get information about who they are, if they're under 18 years old and they're awake and alert, I can contact you. But one thing that I'd like to make a mention to everyone in the room is how many folks have seniors? Okay, we're close to it. Everyone here is high school students, mostly. Kids are getting ready to go off to college. They're going to be 18 either when they get to college or a short time afterwards. If they're 18 years old and they're awake and they've had too much and either the school emergency service brought them in or a good friend brought them in, if they're not impaired to the point of having breathing problems, having heart problems, and I've evaluated that, I can't call you. Okay? They have the legal right for me not to call you. Now, certainly in our emergency departments throughout Mainline Health, we offer for that. We always offer to talk to parents, and it's actually a policy that we, in the emergency department, that we offer to talk to them first, or say that you're gonna, you should talk to your parents. And the kids will say, "Oh, I really don't want them to know." Well, the truth is, you're going to eventually find out. So we try to encourage them to talk to you about that. you're the ones who are holding their insurance, and what's going to happen is the insurance bill is going to come, and you're going to see that. Whether you got a copay or not, you're going to see that bill. And so, what were you doing in the emergency room? Oh, well, I sprained my ankle. Because it's not going to necessarily tell you that they were intoxicated. It's not going to say that their alcohol level was at a certain point. We don't do that. So if you see those kinds of things come home, make sure you really kind of drill down and ask what happens there. I think that's really enough. If there was anything else specific that you wanted me to talk about. Okay. So if there's questions later, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you. And our final presenter tonight is District Justice John Tootin, and he is going to talk about, I'm going to make an assumption that he's going to talk about the legal issues that some of our students could run into if caught with drugs and alcohol. Is this, you're welcome, is this your power?
No.
Okay.
I could never come anywhere near preparing a PowerPoint presentation. So I do have a yellow pad. I was listening. The advantage of coming last, of course, is you can listen to all the previous speakers. And I think it was Nadine who said that it's really important to intervene early because otherwise the young person ends up at the end of the road. And I thought that pretty much described what the court is. The court is the end of the road. And it's like a proverbial tar baby. Once you're involved with a court, it's awfully hard to get away from it. The involvement starts with the police citation that is written at the event. And that includes the name of the minor for dealing with underage drinking, age, the address, and other information that the officers often put at the bottom of the citations. They come to the court. I put a fine on that citation. For a first offense, it can range from $100 to $300. For a second and subsequent offense, it can range up to $500. In addition to that fine, there are court costs of approximately $138 put on the citation. The citation is then sent to the address of record. Sometimes the minor will think that the problem can be avoided by intercepting the letter in the post office box. And the result of that is that eventually a warrant for failure to respond is issued, and the constable, who many of you may know, arrives at the door. Once the citation is received, there are three basic choices. The minor and hopefully parents can decide to pay the fine. This has the advantage of, and plead guilty. This has the advantage of being the shortest procedure to follow. In Pennsylvania, though, in addition to the fine, pleading guilty will subject you to a 90-day suspension of your license, if you have one. If you do not, it will delay you getting a license. 90 days for the first offense, a year for the second, and 3 years for the third offense. The second choice would be to request a hearing and plead not guilty. That hearing would be held at the court, and the officer who wrote the citation would present the case for the Commonwealth. The minor, with or without an attorney, would present his or her case. Sometimes the most popular defense is, I was not drinking. I have witnesses that say I was not drinking at the party, I was not drinking in the car, I never drink. The laws of Pennsylvania are perfectly clear that if the minor is at a party where alcohol is served to minors, it does not matter whether he or she was drinking or not. He's still subject to a citation. The hearing would be held, and at the conclusion of the hearing, the court would rule guilty or not guilty, and if the verdict were guilty, the fine would be owed and the license suspension would follow. The third alternative here in Delaware County is to participate in a community service program that is run by the county. What we do is we have approximately every 6 weeks, we will have a group of about 30 people who have received citations for underage drinking come into the court and listen to a presentation about this program. It involves 32 hours of community service, which the community service ranges from cleaning up along highways, I'm sure you've seen that happen, cleaning up parks, working at the county courthouse on clerical duties, and 12 hours of alcohol awareness classes. These often involve speakers from organizations such as Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And once the classes and the community service is completed, the agency and media will send a notice to the court, and the court will dismiss the charges, or the officer, in some cases, does withdraw the charges, and the fine will not be owed, and obviously the license is not suspended. The costs of the alternative program are about $150. The Radnor, as I think some of the figures that you have seen here, the Radnor court deals mainly with college students. And I think that probably is a reflection on the programs that we have been hearing about at the high school and lower levels that have worked with early prevention. I was asked by one of the parents about the consequences that follow the three, either being found guilty, pleading guilty, or having the community service program. In all those cases, there is a record somewhere. It never truly disappears, except under one instance, which I will describe to you. But what happens is it would come up, summary offense, either guilty, summary offense, dismissed, withdrawn. That usually, particularly the latter of those two, does not cause a problem, but in certain occupations, in certain schools, there are going to be questions asked, and in the interview, the child or the minor will have to be honest, and will have to go into an explanation. And it's much easier not to have to do that. There is a procedure called expungement, and that is not, you don't have the right to an expungement, but you can prepare a petition to the Court of Common Pleas and Media and get a record completely expunged. The court sometimes does grant that, sometimes does not, but it's expensive and time-consuming. I believe that's it. Thank you very much.
So now is the time to ask any and all questions that you have. And how we'll do this is if you stand up and ask the question, Mark or I will repeat that question, and you can direct it toward us or any panelists behind us. Anybody have any questions?
You had a lot of statistics about the underage drinking and the other stuff. Did the survey indicate whether any of that is happening during the day, perhaps off campus, versus on weekends or night?
The question was, in our survey, we had a lot of statistics about the underage drinking and the use, and whether or not that indicated if it was on or off campus during the day or at night. And the answer to that is yes. There were questions that did ask students if they had ever been drunk at high school during the day in the building, or if they are drinking on the weekends, or if they are binge drinking. And there were 3 students and from the demographic information drilled down, probably the same 3 that had said they had been drunk once or twice during the day. But for the most part, it was happening at night or on the weekends when those answers. And one piece about the survey that I did mention at the PTSA meeting is, and that all of you as parents should know, that over 89% of our students said that they trusted and enjoyed spending time with their parents in this community. And that's a big number for high schoolers. So all of you should definitely applaud yourselves for that, because your students like to be with you still, even in high school, and that's huge. So that's all. You're next.
Yes.
I wonder if Sergeant Block could talk about the kids who got citations for alcohol, where you found them. Was it parties, at houses, or adults there? And kids get citations. What happens to an adult that's there if alcohol was provided while they were there?
I'll repeat it. The question was about the big question, what happens to adults who might possibly host a party or who are aware of a party going on and citations are issued?
Basically, what would happen if there are adults on location where the party was, there will be a criminal investigation that the police department will carry out. And as a result of that, depending on the evidence that is obtained as a result of that investigation, charges can be filed against the adults in a number of different areas, such as the corruption of the morals of minors, the furnishing of the alcohol to the individuals, and God forbid somebody may have been sick, there was an overdose there that can lead to further charges. So that's the end result that can happen depending on our investigation and the events and the circumstances surrounding it. I believe the other part of your question was, where do we traditionally see the citations being issued? And most of the time it's as a result of a party at a residence. And it's when the large parties that we have or we get called to as a result of a disturbance or a noise complaint present some operational challenges for the police department when we get there, because sometimes, and it's mostly with the college students, but we do have it from time to time with the high school students, that you could have 30, 40, 50 people that are under the age of 21 in these houses. And it's a frenzy. It's every person for themselves. They're going out windows, doors, and whatnot. So it really presents an operational challenge for the police department, and we tend to stay there and process all the individuals that are under the age of 21. So you may get a phone call. It's not uncommon that your son or daughter may be part of this party, and we're asking you to come to the actual residence where it occurred. But that's traditionally where we see that happening. It's, we're on patrol and we look for these things, but it's usually the neighbor that calls because the house is rocking and nobody's home, and then it initiates a police response.
Yes.
Along those same lines, do we have any data that would indicate the arrests or findings with regard to DUI among teenagers by high school?
Sure. Sergeant Block, do we have any data that shows the trend of DUIs with students from the time they get their license to the time they go to college, underage students drinking?
We do have that, Doctor, and I can get that data for you. It's in our records management system. The one thing I can tell you, and over the course of my career, which is over 21 years, we've seen a significant decrease with individuals between the ages of 18 and 21 with respect to being charged with DUI, simply because of the education that's been out there. And MAD has been one of the organizations that's on the forefront with that started in the 1980s and has helped change the laws with respect to the DUI. So we've seen in my career a significant decrease with that, and I will get that data for you, but it's very low because of the education, and there is pre-planning on the part of our teenagers where if they are going to be doing this, they do have a designated driver. So it's very low that we see that, even at the college level. And recently, within the last couple of years in this area, a couple of the cab companies have worked together where you come down Lancaster Avenue on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night, you'll see 15 or 20 cabs because they're not driving, they're using the cabs.
Another question? Yes.
The question I had was regarding the being in the presence of alcohol if you are not drinking. Like if
your student or your child is at a party and the party gets busted, and now I heard a statistic tonight that they could still get a citation even if they hadn't been drinking. So that confuses me. I don't understand why that can be.
That's a legal question for Judge Tootin. The question was, how is it that the law allows for a student who may not be drinking in the presence of others who are to be cited?
That is the way the law is written. It may not seem fair in some instances.
So
But
they are treated the same as a kid who...
they can be. Perhaps Sergeant Block could give something more on that. You might not charge everybody the same, even though you would have you would have the right to.
That's correct, Your Honor. In Radnor Township, and I can speak for the Radnor Township Police Department, our general policy is if we respond to these types of incidents, when we come in, we will offer what's known as a portable breath test to everybody that's there. If nobody's of 21 years of age, there is a problem. And we do have people from time to time say, I had nothing to drink. So we give them the opportunity to take that test. And if they have a negative result or it's a 00 on it, they're not going to be cited. They were honest with us. So we do afford them the opportunity. The instruments that we use are calibrated on a regular basis. They are accurate. So what we run into is situations where they say they have not been drinking. We offer them the test. They refuse the test. As a result of that, they do receive a citation under the law, what's considered constructive possession. They're under 21 years of age. They're at a location where there's nobody that's an adult, and they've been consuming or they've been in the presence of alcoholic beverages. So the law has ruled that it's considered constructive possession on it. So the best piece of advice we can give everybody is if they're there, they haven't been drinking, take the test.
Related to what you were discussing earlier, if the owner of the house is present and what the ramifications are for them, what if the owner is not there? What if the adult is not there? Are there ramifications to the owner of the residence?
Sorry, we need to be on
No, go ahead.
video. The question is, if the adult is not present at the house, what are the ramifications for the adult at that point?
There could still be some criminal ramifications, again, depending on the outcome of our investigation. But there are civil issues that can arise, that if somebody leaves that house and they're injured, it could come back on the homeowner. So it's more or less, it falls back there with respect to the civil liability. So where on the civil end of it, you should be aware of what's going on. You're responsible for your children's and their activity at the house and bringing people over. So generally speaking, it's looked at. So in those situations, if there's no criminal liability with it, it could revert back to a civil situation if he did not have the knowledge of what was going on.
One quick comment, and I thought of this about the record, and we hear the permanent record. Is it on his record, on her record? From a school standpoint, all that goes to the next level, be that a college, the military service, whatever, is the transcript with the grades. Detention in 9th grade, cutting a class, it's all gone. Any legal issues, they are completely separate. The permanent school record consists of grades.
Can I follow up with that?
When have I been able to stop you?
Not very often in 2.5 years. The only piece, and I can speak to this as a guidance counselor, where our students who have been cited run into issues is the question on the college application that says, have you ever been given a citation or have you ever been arrested? They need to answer that as honestly as possible. Because there have been situations where students have checked off no. And colleges, especially small private colleges, will check. If it is a scholarship student, if it is a student moving forward, they have the right at that point to check, because that becomes a legally signed document by you and your student saying this is the absolute truth. Everything we've put on here is the absolute truth about my child. And I will tell you, in the college process, dealing with a lot of admissions reps, and I know Lynn Blair is one of our counselors in the back, a lot of college admissions reps know that students make mistakes. They know they make mistakes when they get to college, and it's part of the experience. It's better to be forthright and honest than it is to be caught in a lie. because that will follow a student and will very much heavily weigh on a student's reputation. It's one thing to say, you know what, I was at a party when I was a freshman or when I was a sophomore. We got in trouble for drinking. Yes, I was cited. I learned from that, and the admission rep goes, oh. Or the admission rep finds out and then calls you and says, were you cited, blah, blah, blah. And the student's like, oh, well, sort of. I mean, I was there, and yeah, I was kind of drinking, and it automatically brands that student, and then their integrity is called into question. And that is something that you do want to avoid, especially the smaller private schools that will take the time to check those things and do interview processes. So please keep that in mind. That is something, even though there's not a permanent record, that question is asked on almost every college application. Next, I know we were going in order. Go ahead.
My question is for the school administration. Our kids are not in high school yet, but we're hearing about the open campus, and we don't have facts. All we're hearing is that we're concerned about it. What are the rules, and how is that? From what I know, it doesn't seem like it's very proactive to prevent drug and alcohol use. That's why we asked the question about on.
Sure.
It's not meant to prevent drug or alcohol use. The idea of open campus is very simple, and it's progressive from 9 through 12. Kids go to college are going to make every single decision for themselves. We believe they should start making these decisions for themselves in a progressive manner as they become older. A senior in high school, with the permission of parents, is allowed to go out for lunch, is allowed to be out for a free period, the same as the student will be able to the next year. Yeah, it's risky, but we believe that I don't think you can, first of all, you cannot legislate morality, you can't legislate behavior. We really believe that allowing them to make the decisions will allow them to make better decisions the next year. Can kids abuse it? Could somebody go off campus and do something? Absolutely. They could do that whether or not we had open campus. We have 38 doors, all of which go out. There's an element of trust. We believe it works. We think we have a very good, positive environment. We think that the communication in the last few years has increased where we've been able to help kids because it's not us versus them, and it's all part of it. It's a philosophy. It's an arguable philosophy. I admit that. It's what I believe is best for our kids, but every parent does have the prerogative, and I understand how difficult that is to go against City Hall there when every other kid is allowed to do it and you're saying no. But it's a progressive thing from 9th through 12th grade. By the time they're seniors, they are able to have these freedoms and privileges. If you want to add to that.
I'm good. When it's progressive, and I'm going to get to your question in 1 second, 9th graders have study hall and are not permitted to leave the building. 10th graders can only leave 8th period if their parents approve that they can go home. And I will tell you that is very few and far between because a lot of our students are involved in after-school activities, but sometimes a student goes home, they have a job, they babysit, they want to get work done, they want to begin on research, they'll either walk home. And that's the thing with 10th grade. They have to have a ride or they have to be able to transport themselves. In 11th grade, students can leave for lunch. And I believe only at the 8th period as well. And then seniors have open campus. It is mandated with certain things. There are certain GPAs. They do sign in and out of the building. They have to leave their ID cards. I know Mark is working very, very hard at getting a swipe system hopefully in place, if not next year, the year after, where they'll have to swipe in and out, so there'll be actually a time check. So we're working towards tightening up some of those loose ends. But I have to tell you, I came from a different school district. This is only my 3rd year in Radnor, and open campus to me, I mean, I know I sat in the interview, my mouth dropped open. Open campus, great, fabulous. And thinking in my side, oh my God, open campus, they're going to let them free. But it does work. It's not the high school is not perfect. I don't think any school or anybody that stands up here running a school will tell you that there are not sometimes issues and that kids don't sometimes take advantage. The beauty of how Mark runs the building and has set that building up is 3 years ago, we had, Sue's in the back, I think we were at 49 or 50 HS Hope referrals. Last year, we had a total of 56. This year, we have over 100. So there is a community and there is a trust, and students will come and ask us. I mean, as an assistant principal in charge of academics, and to have students come into my office and close the door and say, listen, I just need you to know either so-and-so's not doing great, I've got something going on. They go to their counselors. I mean, the kids inform us and they let us know when things aren't working. So when things do go wrong, the kids police themselves, and it's a pretty neat thing to see.
I mentioned this earlier. The statistic that we are most proud of, or at least I'm most proud of, is our daily attendance. We have 1,200 students. I think today we had 48 absent. It's remarkable, and that's difficult to get kids to want to come to school. We tell kids, I've used this term before, we are a help you place, not a gotcha place. In regard to open campus, in regard to any of these situations, there are abuses that can take place, and I was told I was crazy to do this 4 years ago, but we trust the kids. We trust them, and we respect them. And we really believe we get that back. I think I've been in systems where if it's about, we'll get you, well, that never works out. That does not work well. We would rather have a student feel like they're disappointing someone if they do something wrong, as opposed to, I'm going to get over on them. So that is aspirational, admittedly, but that is the culture that we're after.
The question is, what are we going to do with the data from the PAYS survey? The first thing that we're going to do is attempt to get the survey next year when it's actually the year the state runs it, so we can compare ourselves to the national averages in the state of Pennsylvania and see what's happening. The second thing that we are currently doing with the data is looking at it in-house and, again, working toward programming. Cyberbullying is a big issue, and internet safety. So when we looked at that and there were some questions asked about, do you feel safe in the school? And our data came back very good with safety. 98% feel they've been safetied or feel that they're safe. Less than 2% say that they're bullied. And one said maybe once or twice things have been said about me, but the internet came up as an issue, Facebooking, social networking. So Verizon is bringing in a guest speaker to do some education. So we're really looking at it to see how we can take our educational programming. A piece with that is, as well, as you all know, we're putting in a 9th grade health component to the phys ed curriculum next year, and that will begin to address the drug and alcohol and it's also addressing study skills for 6 weeks, but it's also going to start to address the drug and alcohol education earlier, because we were doing it in 10th grade about 3 months in and finding out that our students were already into it and already using and already being tempted between that summer. So a lot of that data is being used to help us make better educated decisions to meet the needs of our community and our parents through pre-education, preventative programs, but it's anonymous, so it's not like we're looking at it with any one particular grouping or student. Not specifically the sources, but it did ask questions along the lines of, is there drug and alcohol use in your home? How often? Have you had a sibling? Have you had an aunt or uncle? Have you had a parent that has been in and out of rehabilitation? Have your parents talked to you about drug and alcohol? Have your parents? So it asks those type of questions, but it will say, where are you drinking at parties, at your home, at your house? And it indicates a lot of it is parties, a lot of it is at a friend's house or my house. And a lot of the survey we got back was, are your parents aware? Yes. Have your parents talked to you about it? No. So it's interesting, as much as we talk about everything, or we think we talk about everything with our students, and Nadine addressed this, just being straightforward is really the best way to go about it, instead of so-and-so on Saturday said they might be drinking, and I didn't know if you were kind of thinking, the roundabout passive-aggressive way we want to ask. Just ask. Do you think there'll be alcohol at the party? Do you think you're going to be drinking? And to set up, if make sure your child knows they can reach you if there is a problem, if there is an issue, if they feel unsafe. Can they call you without the question, the punishment, the punitive action? Are they able to call you and say, listen, there's alcohol here, my friend's out of control, can you help me? Because ultimately we want them to make good decisions and to be able to do that.
The other piece to that is, and we have had speakers come in, we've had programs come in, we had Dr. Rick Dunlap come in, who sadly lost his own son to a drug overdose of prescription medications. And the one thing he said along those lines was he was hanging with the kids I wanted him to be with. So, it's not the boogeyman on the corner, it's somebody you may like, and the stuff is very available, sadly. And so, yeah, they can, if they want to access it, they can.
In the back. That's okay. In the gray, I'm sorry.
This question is for Nadine. You mentioned the no-use contract, and I was just wondering, have you, I guess, experienced that with the kids that you work with, that there's a lower incidence with the parents that do have that kind of thing, and is that the kind of thing that might be recommended to maybe start before they have a lot of exposure, and then maybe have them sign it again every year, and they start to see that as a red flag, okay, maybe some of these, issues are starting to come up or something like that?
I mean, absolutely, to revisit it. Yeah, I would definitely recommend, and I think I said the earlier you can address these issues, even before, probably a lot of parents, you are parents of high schoolers, but even in middle school, in the 7th, 8th grade year, start the conversations about it, and absolutely start that contract. If kids are going on sleep, they may not be huge parties. We tend to think okay, a lot of drinking happens at these really big parties, but it could just be a sleepover with a couple of kids. I'm going to my friend's house or sleeping over, and who knows what they can get into there. So it can start early. So absolutely, just start earlier and then revisit it. Sure, each year say, let's take a look at this, let's talk. Keep that conversation fresh. Absolutely. It shouldn't be this once and done conversation. Let's have our drug and alcohol talk. I think it's much more effective, to keep talking about it. As things come up in the community, if things happen to their friends, if you're aware of, what's going on with different groups, use that as conversations to have with the kids. I think the kids I work with, maybe, I couldn't say absolutely for sure what, figures are, what statistics are like, but I think a lot, don't have as much involvement with their parents. They don't have these conversations with their parents. Yeah.
Is there a form online or through your organization or anything like that has kind of a format for that sort of contract that might touch on?
Let me, there may be, I can look into that and see if we have anything. Yeah, I can, after we're done here, I can check in with you and get your information, pass that along if I can find it. Absolutely. You're welcome.
And thank you for addressing that about the no-use contract.
No problem.
Thank you. Any other questions for us? Yes.
I keep thinking about the parents' role in all of this. And I keep thinking about, and I think we talked about this at the Reach Coffee discussion, about parents who choose to serve and allow alcohol for minors. And I can't help but think about that when I'm hearing all this, because, our kids we're wanting our kids to communicate with us. On the other hand, are we creating an environment that allows our kids to get away with that? And so there's that fine line. And are you seeing that a lot?
We're not seeing, again, I'm sorry, Mrs. Butler, again.
I'm sorry. Sergeant Block, the question is, are you seeing a lot of the parents allowing the students to drink and provide the alcohol in the home, and what is that fine line with the communication?
We don't see too much of that, thank God, but there are isolated cases out there. But going back to what Mrs. Butler said earlier, I think having open lines of communication with your son or your daughter when they get into these situations, to be able to pick that phone up and have an escape plan to say, this isn't right here, I need to be able to call mom or dad or another responsible party because I need help, I need to get out of this. That's huge, and we're starting to see more of that, and I think that's a That's an education process. So that's the important aspect of it, is to have that communication. Obviously, the law is the law. The police have to enforce the law. So if we're called to those locations, we're going to conduct the investigation. We have to in those situations. So there are unfortunately isolated cases out there that come to the attention of the police. What tends to happen is it's after the fact. And that makes it a little bit more difficult if the police have to investigate it, because the evidence may be gone, things of that nature. But it's a roundabout that so-and-so had a party, or they may have been serving some people that are under the age of 21 there. But they're, like I said, they are isolated. But more importantly, if you have that plan that's in place, that they get there and they realize something's not right and they want to get out, the lines of communication are important.
You touched on a little bit about when the underage drinkers are coming into the emergency room and such, and you touched on the fact that they might not always even remember what they've been through. And it just brings to mind for me this environment that our kids have in this day and age, with the sexual promiscuity, and just such a different level of what is sex, what isn't sex. But do you see in the emergency room with these kids, is there oftentimes that girls have been sexually abused or sexually molested during these times? I'm so fearful about anymore. It's just they're not getting drunk and passing out. Things are happening to them when they're in that condition. And are you seeing that consistently?
Just repeat, the question has to do with students coming into the emergency room and whether they've been the victims of a sexual assault, and whether he is seeing an increase in that
I'm sorry.
as a result of the
Because they've
drinking.
been drinking. Well, first let me start off by telling you I don't have statistics, but I will tell you a sad story. Not at Bryn Mawr, for those of you. My wife was also in medicine, and at a facility that she worked at, she had a young lady that she was taking care of who was brought in, and she was brought in a day later with the claim of rape. Her friends had found her somewhere on the campus, and happened to be a college student. And as they helped her and she started to walk, out of her pant leg, she found her underwear. She had no recall of what happened. So when she went the next day and had an exam, it turned out that she had been sexually assaulted. Was it consensual? I don't know. The police actually had mentioned to her there's no way to prove one way or the other because she was under the influence. Do we see people come in without clothing? A lot. Do we see people come in with torn clothing? A lot. But they don't very often know what happened to them. Could they have fallen down and ripped their clothing? Yes. I have 3 daughters, and so I get very concerned about that. And when I'm working the overnight shift and they become sober, I have a tendency to go over and have a nice conversation with the young ladies about that. They can't remember where they are. So it is a concern.
Sure, you could absolutely.
Are we still seeing a lot of the date rape drugs? Are those ever prevalent in the high school? Or, I mean, I know that there was a trend of that a while back, and you hear about that happening. And I tell my teenagers, never with your drink, not to say drink, but drink, your Coke, if you leave your, go get a new one, that sort of thing. Are we still seeing that? Sergeant Block, do you see that?
Are we still seeing the use of date rape drugs?
There's been a decline in it in the area, but it was primarily we were seeing it in the nightclub settings in the area. And Rohypnol was the number one drug that was out there. But it also, and I'll defer to my colleague here about the medical, I guess the metabolic rate and how it burns off. But more importantly, going back to what you were saying with these sexual assaults and what we see, that's all too common the case that we see here in Radnor with respect to that. After a night of drinking, all right, there's college campuses here and whatnot, and we're getting the phone call usually to come down to the emergency room because they think something was amiss. And we conduct a full investigation, and it's a very lengthy investigation. We're very skilled in this area, unfortunately, but sometimes the end result isn't what the victim's looking for, and that's three-pronged approach through the law enforcement aspect of it, the district attorney's office, and Women Against Rape. So everybody's involved in it, but that's what you have to take into consideration before you go out. So it's unfortunate we do see that.
I would say that we're seeing a decline, but to test for those kinds of drugs is also a special test. It's not something that every hospital and every emergency department, every lab at hospitals can do. And so it has to be specifically concerned for, and then it would be drawn. But I would say in general, from the last 4 or 5 years, we're seeing a decline in that. We're not testing for it either. So, but it's like you said, it's the alcohol. A lot of what we see, happily, is not high school. We're not seeing that many high school students. We have, I don't know how many, 6, 7 colleges in the area, and a lot of it's college students. And I can't emphasize enough to say that, I'm glad you're here, because this is the time to stop it. So we're not seeing it in the colleges.
As a brief aside, we have Women Against Rape coming in to speak to our health classes this year. They'll be in here before the end of the year. Yes.
I just wondered, since we've talked a lot about colleges, and some of us have kids in college or headed that way, and we talked about the law being, if they're 21, I just have known on several college campuses that there's a real head turning to drinking on the campuses, and since I guess we're surrounded by 7, I wanted to know what, from a law legal standpoint, how that's being addressed at Villanova, the ones that are right around here. And if it's not affecting high school students, but it will be as they go on.
Question has to do with the perception of colleges possibly turning their head to on-campus drinking.
As far as the police department's concerned, when we receive a call from any one of the universities or colleges, we respond. And sometimes we're actually going in there as a result of a medical emergency, and it's alcohol related. So the universities and the colleges obviously have to police themselves, but they're also required to report the incidents. If they're not reported to the police department, they still have to report under what's known as the Clery Act, which is they have to put their crime statistics and their alcohol incidents out there. They have to be published. And all 3 colleges or universities in Radnor work hand in hand with the police department, because we have to compare notes, so to speak, when they're doing that. So, but ultimately, it's up to the university to call if they have a problem that's going on there. And I know they do have the policies that are in effect, that obviously if you're under the age of 21, you can't possess or consume the alcoholic beverages on the campus. But if the police department's called, we go in there, we conduct the investigation, and the citations will be issued. Now, if we're not notified, then that's strictly an academic situation that goes before the disciplinary council. And that's something that you may want to address with the universities if you have specifics on it. But if we're called, our policy is very clear on how we're going to handle it.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you heard about instances at the high school where kids who have access to prescription drugs for ADD or ADHD giving or selling these drugs to other kids who believe it'll help them do better on exams, focus better on exams? This is something I recently heard about from kids in school.
We have heard, the question was about prescription medications or ADD medications that may be sold or given to other students. The question made reference to students taking it to better prepare for exams. We have heard of, and this is where we have to be careful, and this is what makes the pills so insidious. You can't smell them. It's often not projected by an individual, but we have heard of transactions, if you will, for many different reasons, none of which are good, but I'm sure that may be one. Sadly, the other one is to get high, or their perception that it will do that.
Is it something that's being talked about in the school at all, or being addressed? Is it something you're hearing about?
That's why we're here. Yes.
And I also heard from whenever
Two statements, one of which that students should not, and they should not, and Mrs. McFarland does a great job with that, any prescription medication needs to be dispensed by the nurse, needs to be given to the nurse. And the other statement was to do pill counts, I believe is what you said, but to be clear on that, a student, even if he or she has a prescription, may not be walking around with that. It should be at the nurse, dispensed by the nurse.
Can I follow up to that?
Absolutely.
And the thing with that, when there is hearsay, we have to be very careful. There are certain laws that protect everybody. But if, there is a scene transaction or things happening, there are procedures in place where we can do investigations, and we do. And Mark does at whole group assemblies, at town meetings, has addressed several times the safety, the drug and alcohol issues, the please remember to give it to Mrs. McFarland. But that is talked about actually frequently. I would say Mark probably addresses safety and, drive slower, be smart, take your education, remember your parents love you, we want to see you back here Monday. But there are little things that are said, I would say, 2-3 times a week over the PA, and definitely addressed 2 to 3 times a year overall with the full school. So they're definitely not things that we turn a blind eye to and ignore. We address them in parent presentations to students, and those have been our really speaker series for the last 2.5 years.
The hearsay piece is very important because something may not be exactly what it appears, and we see this problem, and it is a problem. But that doesn't mean all of a sudden, gotcha, because it just might not be what it appears. And the worst thing we can do is to falsely accuse someone and take them down that path and ruin their integrity when it wasn't true. So, we have to be very, very careful about that.
Yes.
Yes.
This question is for Nadine. So you had the conversation with your child maybe for the first time. I haven't had this yet. So you're at this party. Were you drinking? Yes, I was. Tell me, how does the rest of that conversation Why are you saying that so that I don't shut down that line of communication? Tell me your cell phone number.
It's a great question. The question was, I asked my son or daughter the question, were you drinking? If the answer is yes, then what?
That is a wonderful question. And, I don't think there's anything I can say that's going to really, these are the magic words, this is what you're supposed to say. It depends on your relationship with your child. I would encourage you not to, again, judge, make accusations, like you said, you don't want to shut down the communication at that point. So really try to turn that into then a conversation about what was happening, what made them want to try. Was it peer pressure? Was it curiosity? What was going on in their head when they tried? What was the experience for them? And that one slide said you have, set rules in place about, you expect no use and have consequences and follow through. So if you had conversations, if kids knew what to expect, if they go to a party and they're drinking, and if they know that there is going to be a consequence, that they shouldn't be blown away and surprised when you say, okay, your cell phone's taken away or you're grounded or whatever, kind of rule is set up. Hopefully, if that had already kind of been established and talked about, then they shouldn't be too surprised, or they shouldn't, kind of really get very upset with you and say, I'm never going to tell you anything again. Ideally, you also want to turn this into a supportive kind of conversation and ask how else that you can support them. If it were a peer pressure instance, again, this has been mentioned a couple times, but say, let's come up with a plan where if you're at this party and everyone's drinking and you're not comfortable, how can we get you out of it? Can you, call me? Let's have a code. Let's, say this. I'll come pick you up. So to have a plan in place and then continue that conversation to talk about how can we prevent this from happening again? Does that kind of help? It's a great question.
And those are private conversations, and as many of us know, sadly, there's alcoholism in families. Some kids are dealt a much different hand than other kids, and that's a conversation that is a private one, but has to be had. It's just not going to affect everyone the same way.
We have time for one more question. Actually.
Dan?
Yeah. I have a question on how, and I guess I'll direct this to you. Obviously the ultimate goal is to not have our kids abusing and using alcohol, especially And then, my concern is, how can you talk to them about if someone's had too much to drink? How can, do not let your friend lie passed out in a corner. By the same token, you're saying, we don't want you to be binge drinking or being around this kind of environment, that to me just seems like such a contradiction. But at the same time, I don't want any poor kid to be left, or they're afraid to bring him to an emergency room because they're going to get in trouble or something like that. So how do you discuss it when you said this is not how you should be behaving, but if you do behave this way or around it, we want you to help you. It's such a contradiction.
I'm going to help. I'm going to just jump in with the judge because, as he said, if you've gotten there, you may have gotten too far. There are norms, and then there are laws, and you all in this community establish the norms, and we hopefully reflect those norms at the high school. I don't know if that helps you or not. That's the issue. Look, everybody does it, Mom. It's not a big deal. And again, I talked about the progression of privileges that we talk about as they get ready to go to college. It's very arguable as to what the laws should be, but it's not arguable as to what they are. I don't know if that helps answer, and I don't want to speak for you, but I just did.
No, I don't know how the law came out in that description of it, but the law is, that's the law. Now, that's not to say that the norms of the community and how you deal with them necessarily are guided by that. In other words, I think we've been talking about discussions. We've been talking about trying to work things out ahead of time. That has nothing, by the time you get to the court, you've lost the battle.
I didn't mean this to be a court question. It's all about discussion. Never leave your fellow man, in a dangerous situation, whether it's.
And in some ways, when I work with kids too, we spend so much time saying, you shouldn't be doing this. This isn't what you're supposed to do. But at the same time, it's part of the education piece. If you are with someone, you see these signs, I say these are the symptoms of alcohol poisoning. I want to make sure that kids know what it looks like. Sure, I expect and I hope that you're not around this, but you're right, we do know that there are going to be situations where they may be or they will be at some point in their life, whether it is high school or college or even into their 20s when drinking is legal. For this example, there's still serious consequences if you drink too much. So I think it's having the conversations, telling kids what your expectation is, but also saying, I want you to know, though, that if someone's hurt, if you see that someone, if their health seems compromised, this is what I would like you to do. Because at the end of the day, it is about saving a life or being, really kind of preserving someone's health. So again, there aren't easy answers for this, but it is in the conversation. It's being as open as you can.
I think when you look at that, you can look at it when you told your. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and when I tell my 3-year-old that not telling the truth is bad, and inevitably if I say, who spilled milk, she said, not me, when we all watched her do it. And it's the same type of conversation. Well, no, you did spill the milk, and you did spill it on your sister, and you need to apologize for that, and you need to help clean it up. Because you are part of that. If you are with your friend at a party, our 10th grade health curriculum does talk about the buddy system and talks about health safety and what are the signs of alcohol poisoning and what do you do, who do you call, and a great thing to do with your student. I just did this with my daughter. If someone does something to you or touches you, who are the 5 on your hand? Who are the 5 people you tell? Who are the 5 people you can tell? And I think to do that with adolescents, okay, you may not be comfortable to call me because, let's be honest, in my house, they're not going to call me. They're going to call their dad because I freak out. But I think, okay, you can call your dad. Who are you going to call next? I'll call my cousin. They're in the area. I'll call my aunt. I would call my neighbor. As long as they know there are people and those conversations are had, that they have safety outs, like, I have very close friends that have already said to my daughter, if you get in trouble, you can call me. You don't have to call your mom. I'll come, and then we'll talk to your mom for you. And so there's that communication. If you have a network and you have a community, use it. It takes a village to raise a child. We can't do this by ourselves. And that's why we're all here tonight. is to make sure that connection is made. So by all means, just talk to your children. What is a good choice, common sense? If someone is, you see a car accident and someone's bleeding, you're going to pick up the phone and call 911 or call police. It's the same thing. If someone's passed out, whether you have alcohol in your breath or not, call. 5-10 minutes of embarrassment is going to last far better than a lifetime of regret and shame and guilt if something happens to someone. And I think that's always, I was lucky enough that my father really ingrained 5 minutes of embarrassment will eventually fade and go away, but you don't ever want to live with something that for the rest of your life you can't take back and change. So with that said, I can't thank you all enough for being here, for coming out on a Tuesday night, and it's been a great turnout. If you have any questions, I know the panelists will be here for a few minutes, and as always, you can reach Mark Rye via email or phone on the high school website. So thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Oh, yeah. All right. How about you?